Hi everyone, Mel Gabby here, and this is 10 things I learnt on the road in 2025 in my camper van. This is part of Mel's Campervan Adventures and the Changing Spaces series. So I'm just going to go through some of those key things that I learned so that you can, if you get in a van, or you might just like watching, like I do, other people's experiences and what they've discovered on the way. So just to give you a backdrop, if you haven't watched all of my other videos, I bought the van in 2024 in January, and so I've had it 2 years now, and I've used the van mostly for long trips, visiting. I wanted to visit as many places in the UK as I could, and I had some um, longer drives that I was anticipating, but I wasn't sure if I was going to, one, have the courage and confidence to do that, and two, you just never know what can come around the corner. So I bought the van in 2024, and I've never had a van before, never drove a camper van, and didn't really do any camp. No, I didn't do any camping actually as a kid. First time I did camping was probably about 3 or 4 years ago on more of a glamping site, although you could say it was as cold as just general camping anyway. Um, so I'm going to explore some of the things that I learned, whether you're new to van life or you just like me watching other people's videos about the experiences that they've had on the road. So the first thing is, as a person, I always liked exploring new places. When people say, "What's your purpose in life?" Often coaches will say, "Have a think about the things that you enjoyed as a kid." And, sometimes we can monetize them, or sometimes we can just get back to doing them when either work has quieted down, the kids have grown up, or we've just got some more space in our life. So when we're thinking about meaning and purpose, that's often what that means. And so, as a young person, I grew up in a poor working class environment. So I didn't travel, but I loved exploring. I used to be out on my bike and I'd go and explore the old railway lines, the banks, the River Mersey, big parks, and spend a lot of time with my friends, just getting on the bus and going far out to different places. But when I got to 18, I started working away, and I worked in Wales, Cornwall, Devon, Plymouth, Jersey. So that was when the travel bug really expanded. And it wasn't anything that I planned. Because when you're growing up in those environments, you don't necessarily think, right, especially in the, that would have been early 80s, that I'm going to be traveling and travel around the world. It just wasn't part of the working class psyche, and in particular for women as well. You'd leave school and go to college and either do something industrial to get you qualified, or you'd go and work in a shop, um, or get married and have children. That was kind of like what the life was. So in terms of me seeing anything, in terms of how anything's worked out, no. And I'm going to do another video on what I've sort of discovered about myself in the process over the years, about how I approach planning and what I learned through those reflections. So, when I got married and had kids, me and my partner at the time, we still moved around quite a bit, visiting places, because in our spare time, we used to do music events, hang around with DJs and do gigs and stuff like that. But it wasn't until I kind of knew when my sons got into secondary school and I had the car, that when you've not got to get back home every day and make sure everything's sort of ticking over, when my youngest son went to university, that's when things started to expand for me. And I would take the car and go down. He was at university in Bournemouth, and I'd go down and visit him. But I always made sure that I got the map out and had a look at all the areas around, because I just wanted to go and explore all of them. I've always approached it in that way. So I spent a lot of time on the south coast around Bournemouth and Weymouth, um, Boscombe, all that sort of part of the coastline. And then I then got a camera, and started getting into photography and wanted to travel about more. And so that was literally the focus at that time for a few years. And I only sort of started thinking about getting a camper van probably around 2021, 22, but mostly around 22. I was chatting to my uncle, and we were just looking at sort of places we were thinking about where could you visit. And I started to, I think I just started to see other people who had their camper vans and started to think about travel even wider, because um, by 2020, like a lot of people, I was working at home. So I didn't have to be based at home. I could be based in lots of different places and still work and earn an income. And by late 2022, my projects had come to an end, and I started working for myself fully. And so I could get on the road even before I got the van, which I did. But also in 2023, I'd trained as a yoga and meditation teacher, and I've been teaching online for a couple of years. And I decided to contact festivals because I was into the spiritual well-being festivals, um, and started contacting them to see if I could teach some yoga, meditation, and run some workshops. So by the time 2024 came and I was able to get some money to get a van, the that fit really well in how my lifestyle had started to develop. I was consciously focusing from about 2016 as to the kind of work I wanted to do, the lifestyle that I wanted. But it was only really late, much later, because I'd done some trips in 2018. I did a month around Italy, went via train and plane, and explored loads of Italy and a part of France. But it was only probably around 2020 when we was at home a lot, and it was great that everything sort of still went quite still. And I then started to think about other places I wanted to go and visit again. So, yeah, I guess the sort of re-emergence, as many of us go through in our third act in life, we sort of start opening up again and really start thinking about who am I? What am I doing? What do I want to get out of life? And have got more time and sometimes more resources to put into funding um, any of those passions, whether that is doing a course once a week, or going to classes, reading more, or actually getting out on the road and traveling more. So, of course, it's become a lot more popular as well. So that's kind of the backdrop to me. So when I got the van, I'd never drove a van and I was quite nervous. So I did some short trips. And in the first year, I went to the festivals, taught the festivals, and had my van, which was amazing. Went to other festivals that were great. Did some small mind, body, and spirit gigs, but also then explored a lot of Cornwall, a lot of Devon, the South Coast, and the coast of Kent. So all of that area really. And so when it got to 2025, I'd done a lot of that, exploring those areas already, and I wanted to expand it a bit more. So I knew by the August, I was thinking about, I wanted to spend a lot of time in Wales. I'd been to North Wales and worked there, but I'd never done the sort of South Wales coast. And I wanted to get up to Scotland. And that was kind of activated that idea, as a lot of how my life unfolds. It's usually through a conversation and an idea, and I think, oh yeah, maybe I'll do that. So Scotland was a sort of vague idea because I've been talking to my uncle about us both going up there and go back to the island. If you've seen any of my other videos, the Scottish ones in particular that I did in September and October, I've gone back to the island with my uncle and visiting people. But sadly, my uncle passed just before the end of 2022. So in a way, me getting the van and doing the Scottish trip in particular was a more of a focus on the heritage of going to the places that I was going to go with my uncle, and really just expanding that exploration more, because 2023 and 4 were testing years. I was testing out what it was like to teach at festivals, go to them, what I enjoyed, what I didn't enjoy, and that constant sort of plan, do, review process, as you learn when you're a project manager, because I've been that a few times as well. So yeah, so I started to slowly expand really in 23 and 24, but 25 was where I decided to do much bigger and longer trips. And because I can work on the road as well, it didn't mean that I had to wait for a particular time to have time off to then get to do these trips. So early on in January, no, I think it was actually February and March, I went back to the Kent coast and spent a lot of time in Whitstable, Herne Bay, Broadstairs, Margate, and I did the whole of the Kent coast, taking me down to Hastings, Brighton, sort of towards Bournemouth, and I did that whole coast, and I spent 3 or 4 weeks down there. And then I did a separate trip back down to Brighton, Worthing, and did more of that coast. And then in May, went back to Kent, and then decided in August that that would be South Wales and September would be Scotland. So the best thing for this is when you think about your own personality, of what lights you up, what makes you feel good, which is all of what my work is about, really, whether I'm doing one-to-one work with clients, coaching people, helping people feel less depressed, less anxious, less stressed often. Sometimes it's big transformation shifts and change, but often it's really just feeling less of the things that don't make us feel good and focusing more on the things that do and starting to implement some of those changes. So a lot of my client work has been about gently moving people out of those situations and more towards a way of being that works for them. And I've seen that with several of my clients. And sometimes it's big stuff like giving up addictions and making big changes in their life with work and relationships. And for other clients, it's that slow movement towards them pursuing more of their hobbies and friendships and using their money and resources in a different way so that they do feel happier, healthier, and have better well-being. And so that applies to me because what I love as my personality is I just always loved exploring. I'm curious. I like going to new places. I think what I discovered when I was going to Bournemouth to see my son at uni is, like in brain research, in terms of the chemicals that are in our bodies, if we stay in one place too long and we don't have anything to look forward to, we're not accessing any of the things that we enjoy doing or are passionate about, we're missing out on those dopamine hits, the endorphins and the feel-good chemicals, basically. And we know in wellbeing research, it's multiple factors that support you to feel a lot better about your life. And people can get really stuck. So I'm not for one moment saying that it's easy to do, because I've been on my own journey as well. You know, I had serious depression after the birth of my first son, and that took a while to come out of. But basically the tools that I use for myself and what I teach my clients is about really tapping into what those things are that make you feel good. So the whole of the journeys over the 23 and 24 in particular were about really reviewing how I felt. And some of the key things, like how long can you keep driving before you get exhausted? And then do you stop off at place to place, or do you stop off for a few days and enjoy each area and go in deeper into that context and explore the nature, but also the history, and meet people and go to the local places where people hang out? Like, what's your approach? So I've never been someone, because I've had burnout twice, I've had to be mindful that I don't just get in the van and look at the map and say, right, I'm going to go there, 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 and there, and just keep driving, stay for a few hours, keep driving. What I noticed is I can drive for 3 hours, 6 hours, but I always aim to stay in one place in that vicinity where I can explore locally in an easy way. At least 2 nights, that I'll stop off in one place. Sometimes I stay longer, and sometimes I go to a place and think I'm going to stay there. Then I change my mind at last minute because the vibe just feels off. So I learned that about myself, because if you've had burnout and you just don't know how much energy you've got on different days, it's quite difficult to plan things. You can't plan them in precision and say, right, I'm going to do this for these 3 days and go there and go there. And you can't always take into account a lot of the time, unless you're a hiker and you're out in nature all the time, is what the weather conditions are going to be like, and also what's going on in each area, whether there's any local festivals that are going to tax the roads and make things more difficult to get a place, campsite. And going to Wales In August, I thought the roads were going to be incredibly busy because I was not attempting to go to Cornwall and Devon at that time of the year because the roads are narrow and lots of people are taking their vans and going, of course, to the most beautiful of places. So you have to think about how much can you drive and travel for before you get really tired so that it doesn't accumulate, so that you don't wake up feeling forced to get out of bed and start driving again. Also, if you've done your research, I've done quite a bit of research. You do spend a lot of time researching where can you stay. So I was using two apps, the Brit Stops and Part for the Night, and I didn't find the Part for the Night that helpful for when I did the longer term trips. Some of the information was out of date, so you need to check the reviews when you're looking at the apps and reading those. But the Brit Stops was really good because it has lots of people who have pubs or vineyards or, farms where you can go and stay free. And of course, you can eat and drink there if you want to, and that benefits the local economy. So the having an app on your phone was really helpful. I use Google Maps a lot to get because Google Maps just has so much local information in there when you start getting to a place. And I had a broad idea of where I was going to start. I was going to go to Bristol, then Portishead, and spend some time in Portishead and Clevedon. I've been there before. They've got an outdoor pool there. I like it. It's easy to park up. And it's just a nice area to hang out for a couple of days. And then I knew I was going to go from Bristol to Newport and go right round towards Mumbles, the Gower Peninsula, towards Pembrokeshire, and right up to Fishguard. So that's what I did in my Welsh trip. So I had a broad idea of where I'd start and where the last place was that I wanted to get to, but I didn't know how long it was going to take. So you also do need to do a bit of research about campsites and have a look at what campsites are in the area, what the average price is, what you're willing to pay. If there's a few of you and you've got children, campsites work out really cheap. But if there's only one of you and you're staying for 2 or 3 nights at £35 a night on average, it can, if you're spending 3 or 4 weeks on the road, that will rack up in terms of your outgoings because you also need a good bit of money in terms of the cost of the petrol to lug a 3-ton van around. Some of the more modern vans have better fuel economy. I haven't gotten that into much detail. I just know I was spending a lot more on petrol than anything. So sometimes I stay in a campsite for a couple of nights, and other times I'd stay in a free Brit stop or in some of the coastlines actually right next to the beach. So researching through your Google Maps or whatever map system, the broad outline of where you want to go. Do you want to see, do you want to go to waterfalls and lakes, churches, visit the history, get an idea of the things that you're looking to experience when you get there? I just love going to local coffee shops, parking up, wandering for hours, which I did in St. David's. I was there for a few days. I did in Mumbles and Whitby and Scarborough and on the island when I was on the island of Bute and just hanging around and going to cafes and having breakfast and going to coffee. I live quite a simple life actually, and I like simple things. And that's what I love about the van is I can take my fresh coffee, I can take my oat milk, porridge. I make that overnight porridge and I put in nuts and dates. So I've always got the resources, some eggs, some bread, because I can make toast and eggs and bread, bacon, a few simple dishes. So I love being able to access that whenever I want, when I'm hungry, because I don't, I just eat when I'm ready. So if I've got the resources there. So think about the supplies that you need. So that if you can't access shops, so for example, when I was in Wales, when I was at St. David's, I was in a really remote campsite right next to the sea. It was beautiful, but there wasn't a shop for miles. There wasn't even a petrol station. And when I went to one of the beaches in Pembrokeshire, there was a coffee stall that came, but basically it was just coffee and cake. And I started to run out of resources there. So normally I have eggs, oats, bread, protein shake, some fruit, butter, what else? The nuts, and maybe some snacky things. And that I'll always have about 3 or 4 day supply. So that if, because I don't stock much in the fridge, because when it got to over 25 degrees, you only really want to stock meat maximum for 24 hours. The bacon wasn't too bad, but keeping the temperature of the fridge at the right temperature to store meat is you have to be really conscious of that. I also got a really good breakdown cover with green flag. It's specifically made for caravans and camper vans. And what that means is because I teach at festivals, the last thing I want is I've booked at a festival, I drive there, my van breaks down, and then I've got nowhere to stay because that's like your house on wheels, and you haven't got to the event. So the green flag will actually get you to the event or your holiday, and you can stay there for like a week and stay in your van, and then either get your van to a local station or get you home, and then you can fix it. So I've got normal breakdown cover with my bank, but the green flag, and which I ended up using twice. Once when I was in Scotland was absolutely amazing. The guys were great because they're using the local providers really, but they were quick and really, really sorted things out quickly. So that's the breakdown, and I recommend definitely having breakdown cover regardless of how new your van is, because you've just got everything in there. And also make sure you've got a hold door so that if you do have to leave your van like I did in Scotland, I had an old suitcase that I carried with me that just sat in the passenger seat, so that if anything did happen, I had all my jeans. I had 6 weeks worth of clothes and supplies that I could put in one bag and bring, and my shoe bag, because most people are going to take some walking shoes, flip-flops, beach shoes, trainers. You need at least 3 or 4 different types of shoes. You need your wet jackets, your jackets for if you go swimming on the beach, as well as your jackets if you're in the city and it's really hot day. So I'd have a small leather jacket and I'd have bigger furry jackets, because you just don't know the temperature shift that I experienced in August to September when I went from being in Wales at 25, 26, 27 degrees, it was boiling, to then going up towards Scotland, starting at Cambridge and then getting to the south coast, Whitby. One minute it was really, really hot, and the next minute it was raining. So you're on the road, so you need access to the staple clothes. The other aspect of this is anxiety. So I've talked on other videos. I can and have since being a kid struggled with anxiety. And the anxiety as a kid was going to new places and spaces, interestingly. But it's different when you're a kid, because if adults don't describe to you what exactly to look out for and, where you're going and all of that, that will heighten that anxiety up. But I need to check my phone 1 second. So it's really worth thinking about um, the key things like what you actually need in the van, your Google Maps, your supplies that you're going to need, the food that you like to eat, but what's easy to cook. But then your own emotional barometer in a way. Like I said, I experienced a lot of anxiety as a kid. And then when I went traveling around, I wasn't that anxious when I was doing that. I'd literally just pick up a bag, and I had a job at the end, you see. So I'd jump on the coach or the train and go and work in any of those places. And I'd already been to the South Coast. Uh, I spent a lot of time in Kent and the South Coast, like Brighton, Bournemouth, and all of those places. So I kind of knew the roads already, where you could stay, what to look out for, where my favourite coffee shops were. But when I went to the south of Wales and Scotland, I hadn't been there before at all. So I didn't know how steep the roads were going to be, how easy they were to drive, how busy they'd be. Hope, fingers crossed that the van was okay. And the Wales trip went really well most of the time. Apart from I lost one of the plastic wings on the back of my van, fell off somewhere, and broke one of the back lights. And it was a day when I was actually quite tired because I'd done a lot of driving. And that's what I'm saying about referring back to, you know, how tired you get with the amount of driving that you do and the people that you spend time with, you know, is you've got to take those things into account. But when I went to Scotland, it was a series of anxiety, fear, awe, wonder, excitement, jubilation, hope, anxiety, fear, jubilation. It was like that every day because the weather changed. I'd changed locations. The van started breaking down on and off. I had to start jump starting it. By the time I got to Scotland, I was jump starting it most mornings. When you go to an island, most of these places are summer workers, so they'll often go and live somewhere else in the winter. You can't access services. So there's so many things to take into account. And, you know, going to Scotland, I don't know what the mileage is that I did actually, but, you know, driving from Carlisle to Glasgow took me 3 hours. And that was, you know, and I was coming up near from London. So it's a big trip to do. And I didn't realize how big it was that I'd taken it on. And I didn't think I was going to get there, as I've said in other videos, because the van was problematic. The weather started changing. It started getting colder. And it's great being in a van until it gets to about 10 degrees. And that's when you definitely need to have a heater. So on the van life pages, they're always talking about what heaters to install. They're not that expensive, but you need a heater. You cannot just cope on. Um, you know, even if it's Russian climate camping gear, you're in a metal box essentially. And you know, I've got low thyroid, so sometimes I can get really hot, and other times I can be absolutely freezing. So being in a nice cold van, exposed to the elements, especially when I was in Whitby, we were up a hill, so right, you know, exposed to the elements, and it was a beautiful scene that we had of this, you know, of the whole landscape. But it was really cold some nights, and when you start getting cold, that's when you can start to feel miserable. And I did feel like that when I went out for the first time in my van, and I think it was January, and I thought this doesn't feel fun. And then in the summer, you need things on your windows to stop the sun from glaring in, because otherwise now you're in an oven, you know. So you're not always going to get the happy medium. And then when you get soaked, you've got to think about how you get back in and out the van when your clothes are drenched, how you dry your clothes and things like that. So I'd often have enough clothes for 3 or 4 weeks. I kind of know now what I use, how much I use, and what I need. So yes, your own emotional climate of what things make you anxious and what helps you, like how much you can is in your control is the reality. What's not in your control, like the weather. But you can look at weather forecasts, but you know, some places the weather changes really quick, so you've got to be mindful. And then where are you going on your own? Are you going to remote places? Are you going to places where other van lifers go? So a lot of the places I went to were still accessible by other van lifers. So I stayed occasionally in a place where there was only one or two other vans, and that was in St. David's, and that was very creepy, that campsite. Because it was literally in the sticks, right, not far from the sea, but you couldn't see it because it was at the bottom of this hill. And it was very windy and it was really creepy at night. And it was very basic, very, very basic facilities. They had cold showers and toilets. So I actually have I heat up the water, put it in a bucket, and then I go and have a shower in the shower, but with the warm water because I can't I can't do cold showers. Um, like I said, it was a mixture. This is the real utter honesty. It was a mixture of some days gripping the steering wheel and feeling terrified as I'm either wondering if I can get up the incline on the way to Glasgow or down the road that was like this as I was driving down to Saundersfoot, which was absolutely beautiful. But I'm parked up on the bay. I got a beautiful vista of sunshine, the waves rolling in. It's so chilled. And at the same time, panicking, I don't know if I'm going to get back up that hill because it was, you know, it was like that. So clearly I made it because I got back home because at least when you're out near farms, you've got tractors and stuff that if you need to, you can get pulled out. But so it's that emotional landscape of just the utter joy when you drive around the corner and you see, like I did when I went up to um, near Weymouth, up. Portland Bill, and I saw the whole of Chesil Beach for miles, absolutely stunning. And in that moment, you can't describe these things, you've got to do them. That's why it's good to go and do trips. Because even if you haven't got a van, take your car and, stay in hotels or bed and breakfasts, or get your car where you can convert it a bit, where you can sleep in your car and just go out for a day or a night, and 2 nights, and just start experiencing nature and the elements a bit more. So, like I said, for the Wales trip, I had it mapped out where I wanted to go around the coast. And I stopped off at all the cities, Cardiff, Newport, Carmarthen. Um, I stopped up at some for a few hours. Carmarthen, I actually toured around the castle, looked at the history. St. David's was absolutely stunning. I spent 3 days there, went in the cathedral, spent the whole afternoon in there, and they've got a cafe there, and the breakfast is amazing. It is so good. So, dopamine and mental health. So, I can go, I have a sort of, how can I put it? A kind of creator energy. Anyone that's an artist or a musician, or I can get really loads of insights and inspired, and I want to write and I want to record and I want to explore, and I put all these ideas somewhere. Then I can have a few days of where there's nothing comes to me, and I'm bored and I don't know what to do. Then I have other days where I've been on the go all the time, and I'm happy to just sit and chill. And I like watching the old 80s programs. Not, I don't like the drama, the new stuff. I don't want psychological thrillers or the intensity. I also practice, I've got my own sort of spiritual practices. I do yoga, meditation, stretching, mindfulness as a way of just in terms of how I keep my own ecosystem, my emotions sort of managed and maintained. Because I write and reflect on a lot of these experiences that I have, and I have client work, so I support people also on their journey. But the thing is when you go on a road trip and you go into new places, your brain is releasing dopamine. It's novel, you're curious, it's exciting. I stop and have conversations with people. When I was in Ross on Wye, I was just walking out the coffee shop and there was a guy there, retired, I think he was in his late 60s, 70s. And he was just asking about my camera. And so we had a bit of a chat. And he told me that he used to work for the Philharmonic Orchestra and had traveled around the world and had worked with loads of stars. And I really wanted to record that conversation. But I'm mindful of not poking a camera in people's faces. But I knew he was going to have the most wonderful stories. And that was just an amazing interaction. And then when I was in Cardiff, there was a guy there that was asking for money. And I went over and started chatting to him. And he was talking about how he ended up in Cardiff. And he was now more involved in the church. And he knew a lot about Christianity. And we were talking about the churches in the area because I started visiting churches, museums, and cathedrals. And I was really attracted to go into any of them in the cities. So that was amazing. And so I just had some brilliant conversations. While I was in Pembrokeshire on one of the beaches, I met a guy there who used to work in, oh, what's the job? He worked on the port, like a port master, I think. And he'd also been doing a deep dive into the history and looking at Pembrokeshire. And so we talked a lot, and we met another lady, and we were talking about music, and we were sharing what we were all listening to, because I was listening to tunes and thinking, oh, that's really cool. I've never heard of that before. And we were, just sharing those ideas. And she had a paddle board. We went into the sea, and those things just unfolded. And I hadn't planned for that because I just didn't know. The other aspect of this is I wasn't actually that enthusiastic or excited about going to Wales or Scotland. It was really odd. I couldn't figure it out. And I started to realize is that when I focus on just getting in the van and getting on the road and going in a direction, that's all I need. Is I don't get excited because I don't know what I'm going to expect. I don't know what to expect in any of the places that I go to. And some of the places that I had on the map that I thought, right, I'm going to go there, book somewhere for 2 or 3 nights and hang around on the beach and just chill. And I'd get there and I'd feel the vibe of the place. And I was like, no, it doesn't feel right. And I didn't stay there. Then I wanted to go to Barry, which is part of the Gavin and Stacey series, is set there. And I don't really like the fun fairs and arcades and all of that. But the beach and the energy there was really cool. And I also dived into the history of the area. And that was one of the biggest exporters of coal in the coal trade industry was Barry, Newport, and Cardiff. But Barry was huge. And so Barry as a place was where the miners and their families used to go in the summer to have some days out or, a summer holiday. So Wales has got such amazing history. The people were lovely. I think I only met one grumpy man that was in Carmarthen. But everyone else was just really friendly. It was so chilled. The roads weren't busy, apart from driving round. Cardiff was a challenge at 30 miles an hour in a city. I get it in some places, but to have a lot of the roads in 30 rather than the average 40 or 50 was just, um, I thought the van was going to cut out with just how slow it was going. Um, I also did a deep dive, and you'll see in the videos I've got called Reflections on the religion, spirituality, the working classes. That kind of started when I went to Portishead a couple of years ago and stayed in a really nice hotel. I started looking at the history of those areas, the places that have got the really nice buildings and how they were financed and trade going back to the early 1800s. And that became much more obvious again in Portishead and Clevedon, but also when I went to St. David's, because when you go around the palace and the cathedral, and you can see how much money was accessed or utilized at that time, and the role of the servants. And then I started to find out more about the Chartist movement that was across England, but also about the fight for equality, for voting rights. Because at one time in history, unless you owned, I think it was unless you owned land and was over a certain age, regardless if you was a man or a woman, you didn't have voting rights. And then men got the vote. And then, of course, it took a long time for women to get the vote, but also the movement of the Chartists and how they stood up and were fighting for rights, and the connections between Australia, is that if you stood against the government, you could be deported and put in prison, thousands of miles away. So I really dove into some of the backdrop, and there's so much more to discover. I mean, for no way have I even scratched the surface, but I really enjoy that because I'm really into how we evolve as humans and the kind of, a lot of the work I do, it's about how that people suffer, but a lot of suffering has been caused by overtaxation and really hitting people hard. The money that the church used to take off people to keep the church going, and people couldn't afford to feed their children, and the workhouses, and that when industry changed or shut down, people were left with no jobs and were starving. And so it's that intersection of work, family, history, heritage, access to resources, and whether you're born into a rich family or whether you're born into a poor family. And it was really easy to see the divides up until even the 80s, 1980s. So I did a much deeper dive into those things. Met other van lifers, that was really cool. In the different places. Really friendly most of the time. Everyone that I've come into contact with. And it's nice when you're on the campsites because you will always, whether you're washing up your stuff or going for a shower, meet someone, share what they're doing, what you're doing. And that's really nice. And I've made some friends on the road that I've kept in contact with. The other thing is as well is everything's temporary, that even if you do stay at a free place or the parking charges are cheap, I think you can only stay in most places maximum 3 nights. And so you have got to constantly be on the move. So it's great getting all the dopamine hits, getting the curiosity and feeling the wonder. But if you are constantly driving and constantly on the road, then, your body, your nervous system needs to rest and calm down. And I certainly noticed that because eventually my van broke down completely when I got to Dumfries. I'd done all the places in Scotland that I wanted to go to that I knew was also feasible to get to. because the weather had massively changed. When I was leaving the island, it's when the storms were coming in that we were expecting to have pretty much most of the UK battered by the storms. So that made a difference as to where I was going to go next and how much longer I could stay on the road. But the van broke down completely in Dumfries, and I ended up leaving it with the company to cart it back to my mechanic past London, and they gave me a hire car. So I drove back from Dumfries. I did it over 2 nights, heading through oh, where's that place everyone gets married? So round Dumfries, Gretna Green, and then across towards Newcastle, and then I started coming down the middle of the island. But on that coast, the west coast, it was incredibly strong. The wind, the car got absolutely battered. I was having to drive really slow as the lorries went past because you couldn't see for a couple of seconds every time the car got soaked. So that was a bit hairy coming back that trip. So my nervous system, by the time I got home, I'd felt like I'd been on a fun fair for several days, jostled around on the different rides. So it was really nice getting back into my own comfy bed and being in the warm and being able to wash all my stuff and settle. And that took about 2.5 weeks. It was like being on holiday in my own house. Even though I'm working, it just felt like I just really needed to settle and be still because stillness and rest is really important. We can't glamorize this constant being on the move and always being in action and always filming and always doing these things. We've got to also value rest, stillness, a good sleep, and feeling safe. Nervous system can relax when we feel safe. And that's why we have to be really mindful about where we park. And that's why campsites are good, is because there's a level of protection. There's other people there. They're much safer places to be, and there are other places to not park. So, so in terms of all the emotions, you go through the whole emotional cycle. I did part of the Scottish trip with a friend, and sadly that didn't work out because the way that we were planning the trip was based on the way that I was planning the August trip, but the weather really started to change. The access to staying places started to put more stress on us actually just being able to do most legs of the trip together. The best places I went to that I really loved. I liked Cambridge. We went there, found it really difficult to drive around, got lost a few times. But the architecture and the history there is great. I ended up then after Cambridge, I wanted a couple of days rest. We ended up in Hunstanton, and it's a really sort of sleepy old village, but it just had a nice vibe there. The coast is really on that side of the coastline. It's just really raw, rough, and rugged. I liked that. I was going to do the East Coast, Lincolnshire, but I didn't go around there in the end. But I really liked the coastline, Yorkshire coastline, absolutely stunning. Whitby, Scarborough, and I can't remember the other places in between. So I did the whole of that coastline, beautiful. York was stunning. I mean, I'm not far from Windsor, so we've got cobble streets and similar pubs and stuff, but York is much bigger, and the cathedral was absolutely amazing. And I had a tour of Whitby Museum and a tour of the cathedral in Carlisle, and York, and it was just so worth it because there's just no way I could see it was beautiful, but they really start to talk about individual aspects in York. They talked about the stained glass windows and the stories behind many of them, and they've got hundreds of them. And then they've got various rooms for different periods of time and the different people that have been, like St. Hild, who was a big figure within the church history and connected with Whitby Abbey and York Minster. Really worth going, worth the money. So going to the cathedrals was really big for me this year. I felt a real pull to that. And I felt a real pull to, I guess, going to more land that may hold sacred spaces because of the ley lines or the energy of the land. And so for me, it was more about the energetic experience of going through these places outside of the gloss, but also interested in the history and the architecture. Um, so Wales was stunning. I want to spend a lot more time in Wales again this year, and I'm definitely going to go back up to Scotland, but I'll probably go via Edinburgh up towards um, Aberdeen and that way, because I've done most of the coastline on the other sides. And my resilience is much higher. I manage the anxiety much better, and I coped in extreme weather conditions. So hopefully you've liked this podcast, and let me know whether you've got a van, whether you've been to any places in Wales that you liked, or Scotland. What was the thing that caused the greatest anxiety for you, and what you're most proud of in 2025? Because the whole year, when I look back, there were challenges and there were things that I have personal struggles with at times. But at the same time, I just got to immerse myself in awe and wonder as a more permanent state. And that's all I can say, really. So thank you for watching.